everything is going to hell down here in Texas.
Gunman podcast with Big Bad Bob. Gunman podcast, here is your host, Arthur Rickleby. Gunman podcast with Big Bad Bob. Gunman podcast, here is your host, Arthur Rickleby.
Oh, yeah, you know what that song means. It's another exciting edition of the Lone Gunman Podcast. I am the Triple B, Big Bad Bob, here with you, otherwise known as Rob Clark, for another exciting episode. This week, we're going to be talking about a figure in the Garrison investigation known as Bill Boxley, also known as William Wood, a known, allegedly former CIA asset working in the DA's office for the Garrison investigation into the death of our beloved 35th President, John Fitzgerald Kennedy. But before we do, please indulge me with a word from our sponsor, Silk City Hot Sauce. Big Bad Bob here with you for Silk City Hot Sauces. Why Silk City? Because this hot sauce comes to you directly from Paterson, New Jersey, also known as Silk City. These hot sauces are 100% natural, gluten-free, vegan, contain no chemicals, fillers, dyes, or junk. Everything is packed into recyclable glass containers because glass doesn't leach weird flavors into the product. All other hot sauces are sourced in small batches from locally bought fresh peppers. It's all about the pepper, people. I'm telling you. Your boy, Big Bad Bob, loves his food like he loves his women. Hot and spicy, but not so hot you can't eat them. So, if you love yourself some sauce and you're tired of trying to transform your bland meat into something edible, with the tip of a jar, you will transform your life forever. Head over to silkcityhotsauce.com, place an order, and upon checkout, enter the code Gunman, that's Gunman, for 20% off of your entire order. You won't regret it. Thank me later. Peace. And there you have it, folks. If you would like to support the show, hang on a second. That sounds like a lot of reverb here. Hold on. Good Lord. Okay, that's a little better. My God. Sorry about that. I don't know why the reverb was so bad on that, but it's fixed. It's fixed now. And yes, if you would like to support the show and get some damn good hot sauce to put on your eggs in the morning, just like Joe B does, make sure to head over to silkcityhotsauce.com. Put your order in, and on checkout, enter the code Gunman, Gunman, for 20% off your entire order. Go check them out. They just dropped a brand new hot sauce flavor. So make sure you head over there and get it. And a big thank you to the listeners who have done this already. You are helping your boy, and trust me, I appreciate it. All right, to the show. So let's get to Bill Boxley. Let's have a listen and see what Joan Mellon thinks about Bill Boxley
So we have a variety of figures. We have a figure named Bill Boxley. Boxley he was with the CIA. There's no doubt about that. He'd been a CIA operative, and then he says he left the agency. But of course, now we know nobody ever leaves the agency, and he forgave him. Garrison said he was just duped. He was controlled by other people. And Boxley was behind that. Boxley was also behind the idea that they should discount Beckham. They had letters from people saying, "Take a look at this guy. Take a look at Omaha. Take a look at Thomas Edward Beckham," and about, "Oh, there's nothing in it," and so forth. And this time, Garrison didn't listen to Boxley. Eventually, Garrison fires Boxley in December of 1968, just before the short trial. But a lot of damage had been done, and there were other figures who stole the files. There was one character.
All right, so there you get a little taste of what Joan Millen thought about Bill Boxley, aka William Wood. We have this interesting description from JFKassassination.net. This comes from an internal CIA memorandum to the director of the DCS. Attention, Deputy Director from the Houston office regarding Bill Wood, agent for Jim Garrison, making inquiries in Dallas. Paul Rothermel, a security officer for the Hunt Oil Company, advised Jim Moore that he had been visited recently by a Bill Wood, who was making investigations in Dallas for New Orleans District Attorney Jim Garrison. Wood was inquiring about the CIA and its operations. According to Rothermel, Bill Wood used to work for an individual named Clymer Wright, publisher of the Houston Tribune. Rothermel said Wood went to work for Garrison under the name of Bill Boxley. Rothermel also told Moore that Wood is well known in Houston and that his connections with Garrison are no secret. This is the first we have heard regarding this matter. I'm sure the subject is the same William Clarence Wood, Jr., who visited the Houston office in early 1967, volunteering his services. At that time, Wood said he was executive vice president and editor of the Houston Tribune Publishing Company, a local weekly newspaper. You may recall that we were impressed with Wood's sincerity. He volunteered that he worked for the agency and that his resignation had been readily accepted because he had developed a drinking problem at the time. He also said he had not consumed a drop of alcohol for 9.5 years, and had held several responsible jobs prior to joining the Houston Tribune. We requested a name check clearance, which we received March 3rd, 1967, followed by an eyes alone memo containing adverse information. Because of this, we dropped Wood as a potential source. We have not heard from him since 7 March 1967, the last time he volunteered his services. The Clymer Wright, mentioned by Rothermel, is the present publisher of the Tribune. Although we have no contact with the Tribune, the current editor, Harold Pyle, is reported to be an exceptionally fine individual. He retired from the Houston Chronicle after many years with that paper and joined the Tribune as editor. Jim Moore says Rothermel has nothing more to add regarding Wood. If there's a need for details regarding Wood's separation from the Tribune, we believe it will be possible to obtain the information discreetly. All right, so obviously there's nothing here that supports Garrison's belief that Boxley was a CIA spook sent to undermine his investigation. Clearly, Boxley didn't pack it as CIA. He must have left the agency at least 9.5 years earlier, if that's how long he had been sober, and adverse information meant they weren't going to accept him in 1967. Another document recently declassified clarifies Wood's status. It's a report on various of Garrison's claims sent as an attachment to letters to Senator Richard Russell of the Senate Armed Services Committee and Representative Mendel Rivers of the House Armed Services Committee. This cover letter from Richard Helms is dated July 24th, 1967. The fact that such past experts, people claiming knowledge or inside knowledge of intelligence operations, all were subsequently discredited and impeached, has not deterred Garrison from unveiling yet one more reliable operative, William C. Wood, cloaked in the pseudonym Bill Boxley, purportedly a former CIA employee and Garrison's liaison with a foreign intelligence agency. In fact, Wood was a CIA employee from December 1950 until January 1953. His resignation was requested because of alcoholism, a condition from which he had not recovered as recently as February 1967. Thus, Boxley, rather than being a CIA spy in Garrison's office, was just an alcoholic who couldn't hack it with the agency and had had no connection with the agency for 14 years when he signed on with Garrison. It seems that Boxley was another CIA agent who, like Gordon Novell, Richard Case Nagel, and Robert Morrow before him, traded on supposed connections with the agency, but were in reality just wannabes, or in Wood's case, a has-been. All right, so there's two starkly different categorizations of Bill Boxley. So, of course, Bill Boxley wasn't the only alleged former CIA related individual to try to join up and infiltrate the Garrison investigation. There was also a fellow by the name of Jim Rose. Okay. Jim Rose's entree into the Garrison investigation came courtesy of former FBI guy William Bill Turner, who during this period was freelancing for Ramparts magazine and dabbling in some JFK assassination research. At some point, Garrison passed on leads to Ramparts editor Warren Hinkle, which Hinkle passed along to Turner. Hinkle and Turner would later co-author The Fish is Red, the story of the secret war against Castro. Soon after, Turner inserted himself into the Garrison investigation and brought along with him Jim Rose, who had also freelanced at Ramparts. Although Rose used a number of aliases, Jim Rhodes, Vince Rose, Carl Davis, and Steve Wilson, his real name was Carl McNabb. Carl E. McNabb. But for clarity's sake, we'll just call him Jim Rose because that's how he's often identified in memos, letters, and articles from the period. According to William Hinkle, we called him Jim Rose. At least that was the name by which he was known to everyone on the magazine, including one of the secretaries with whom he took up housekeeping between dairings due. But he had a name for every day of the week. He was Jack Carter when he worked in Miami, until later he became too hot and decided to kill off Carter by simulating a plane crash at sea, thus discouraging the spoil sports in the FAA from inquiring further into the checkered history of Carter's flight plans. He had several newspaper clippings reporting his own death, which he would exhibit with eager shyness of someone showing you an appendix scar or bottled gallstone. He was also known as Dawes, also as McLeish, also as several other people, among which I was always partial to Rose, because of Gertrude Stein and all. But by any name he was, as Damon Runyon said about those types who stand out among other types of their type, the genuine item. He loved adventure, and second only to that, he loved talking about adventure. Although Hinkle considered Rose a real deal soldier of fortune with the intelligence agency connections up the wazoo, others connected to the Garrison investigation were less enthralled with the seemingly self-created legends swirling around the enigmatic Mr. Rose. Rose claimed he'd worked as a CIA contract pilot and had flown missions at one time or another with David Ferry. However, Rose said many things to many people that more often than not were never really panned out. Just the same, there's plenty of evidence to suggest that Rose was involved in paramilitary activities linked to the CIA. Strange bedfellows such as Jim Rose suggest that Garrison showed little hesitation about recruiting into his investigation former intelligence agents or assets from the very same agencies that he theorized were behind JFK's assassination. Such former agents or assets that could potentially serve as moles and undermine his own investigation. And that's exactly what Garrison later claimed, that his investigation had been infiltrated by former CIA spies and ultimately sabotaged. In particular, a character named Bill Boxley, a former CIA spook who prior to hooking up with Garrison had apparently been booted from the agency due to frequent bouts with the bottle. Boxley and Garrison eventually had a falling out, and Boxley jumped ship and ended up actually working on Clay Shaw's defense team. Even though Garrison was knee-deep in his belief that the FBI and CIA were attempting to sabotage his case, he nonetheless possessed an almost fanboy fascination with former spooks. The first time Rose met with Garrison at the DA's office, he was frisked by staffer Lou Ivon, who apparently overlooked a deadly ballpoint pen Rose was carrying. "It's napalm," Rose explained. "If I shot you, your face would go up in flames." Garrison endearingly dubbed Rose Winston Smith, and then later Winnie the Pooh, and Rosalie. Although Rose wasn't officially on Garrison's payroll, he was compensated through a slush fund called Truth or Consequences that was set up by a group of wealthy right-wing Garrison supporters. Among his many activities, Rose was paid $1,000 up front to travel to Tacoma, Washington, to investigate Fred Chrisman, another among the colorful alleged JFK assassination conspirators targeted by Garrison. On a trip in the Northwest in 1968, Fred Newcomb, a JFK assassination researcher and graphic artist commissioned by Harold Weisberg to touch up Kerry Thornley's photo, spent a couple of days in Tacoma following up leads on Chrisman. While there, Newcomb learned that Rose had been snooping around town earlier that year and making claims that Chrisman had been known to transport large sums of money to several cities in the country, and that he had no visible means of support. Rose later claimed that he had been shot at while in Tacoma and barely got out of town alive. So, there you have it. That comes from my buddy Adam Gorightly's beautiful blog, Discordia.com, about Carl McNabb, William Wood, and a couple other, quote, CIA infiltrators into the Garrison investigation. And interestingly enough, Fred Newcomb passed along photos along to his circle of assassination researchers that included Penn Jones Jr., who was able to verify that Rose was indeed the mystery man in the photos identified as Steve Wilson of Interpen, Jerry Hemming fame, Lauren Hall, Lawrence Howard. So that's interesting. And according to Garrison, from his book On the Trail of the Assassins, he spoke very glowingly of Rose and Boxley. He called Rose, or Carl McNabb, or Steve Wilson, whatever you want to call him, an urbane, very bright young man who had grown up in Latin America and spoke Spanish like a native. He was useful in interviews with Cuban exiles, and he was accepted after a strong recommendation from Boxley, who had known him back in his agency days. Rose, McNabb, Wilson, whatever you want to call him, had a number of photographs showing himself instructing anti-Castro guerrilla trainees at the No Name Key training camp with Interpen in Florida back in the early 60s. So there you have it. Corroboration, folks, of some very interesting connections between all of these colorful characters and Bill Boxley and Carl McNabb and the like. So very interesting stuff. So was Boxley a bad guy? Was he really a subversive CIA agent trying to sabotage the Garrison investigation? Or was he an embittered former CIA agent enlisted by Garrison to help fight the very agency that he once worked for and prove them responsible for the assassination of John F. Kennedy? Well, that's up for debate, but we can hear from the man himself. I happen to have an interview with Bill Boxley done by George Renard from 1971 over the course of a week long. And it starts off this way. I interviewed Boxley, be hereinafter, in Dallas on August the 30th, 31st, and 3rd of September 71. The results of these conversations are set forth below. The talks dealt mainly with charges and allegations made by others against B. Some interesting digressions are included, My interpolated comments are in brackets, and Mary Farrell was present during most of the talks. B, at the CIA. So B's job at the CIA was training foreign agents. He was overseas for more than a year, then returned to D.C. to join a staff of 6. He was overseas for more than a year, then returned to D.C. to join a staff of 6 for over a year. He taught his classes from case histories of the CIA operations. For field work, his students would attempt to operate in D.C. If they could do so successfully under the noses of the FBI, they could do so against any counter-espionage agency in the world. B's first wife also was CIA, and they were overseas on the same operation. So, basically, Boxley saying that he helped to train foreign agents. They would run mock operations in D.C., and if they could get away with it without turning up any FBI interest in their operations, then they could do it anywhere in the world. So Boxley left the CIA in 1953 and has had no further contact with it, except a couple of times to pass on information which had come to his attention. B had a serious drinking problem while he was at the CIA. He was not asked to resign, although CIA apparently was not too pressed at his leaving. The CIA tried to help him with his drinking problem, and B still has feelings of admiration and respect towards the CIA. The student who contacted Garrison's office about being recruited was talking about William B. Wood, the longtime overt CIA recruiter who lives in Austin and has an office in Waco right next to the FBI. After Boxley was fired, he went to talk to this man, but he was hostile. Maybe as early as the fall of 1967, Boxley told Garrison, Tom Bethel, and one or two others about William B. Wood. How Boxley went to work for Garrison. So Boxley never investigated the Rose Sherman case, and it had nothing to do with his coming to work for Garrison. Boxley did hear Louisiana State Police Colonel Ben Morgan and his investigator Lieutenant Francis Fuge talk about it, though. Sherman supposedly recounted the story to them when they were flying her to Houston to make a drug pickup. In mid-April 1967, B was an editor on the Houston Tribune, working for Theodore Law, and wanted stories on Garrison. Boxley's source was Ben Morgan. Fruge was at the Holiday Inn, and after Boxley called Morgan, Morgan told Fruge to contact Boxley. B got together with Fruge, Maloche, and a girl at the Houston Tribune. Boxley intended to get a job with Garrison or with the Wackenhut organization, which had been hired by Florida Governor Kirk to work on the mafia. Boxley, who had not been to New Orleans since 1955, was hired by Garrison after a 2-hour interview. Garrison asked Boxley to take a polygraph, and he agreed. A day or two after he was hired, the State's item had a headline on Oswald being linked to the CIA at Atsugi. Boxley got scared that perhaps Garrison was using him as a cat's paw. When the New Orleans PD polygraph examiner invited B to take his test, B was unstrung and asked to wait an hour or so. "Oh, come on," said the examiner. B had run 6,000 to 7,000 charts himself and said he would get a hell of a rolling chart. The examiner said, "It's okay." He did get a rolling chart. The examiner said, "You've lied on every question. Now let's go see Garrison." Boxley replied that he had lied only when he stated his last name to be Boxley. So Garrison, Alcock, Ivan, and William Martin heard the results together, and Garrison did not seem too perturbed. Alcock told Ivan, "Lou, let me have your gun. I'll kill the son of a bitch right now." So Boxley phoned the CIA. The call was taped by Boxley, and Martin was also listening in. Boxley asked for DC information and was given the CIA number. He had the operator dial the number. When they got to CIA, he asked for and spoke to a certain person he had last communicated with from El Paso in 1957. Alcock and Ivine later heard B's tape and reported to Garrison that the man spoke in an enthusiastic, spontaneous, and friendly fashion. B told the man he was applying for a job with Gulf Oil and wanted a reference from the CIA. The man said it would be all right to state that he had worked for the CIA and that to write the director of personnel for a letter to that effect. When B asked, the man said it would not be necessary to identify the project by its code name in asking for the letter. B told him that he was no longer drinking, which came as a pleasant surprise to the CIA man. B said that he had read about the man in a recent book on the CIA and that the book had downgraded his position. B will not elaborate, citing the National Security Act. About a year later, B learned from the telephone call that the telephone call probably was recorded. He had received a memorandum asking him to call Dick Billings, who was trying to get in with the office again. When B asked why the memorandum specifically told him to use an office phone, he was told that the NOPD was taping office calls. B says they got at least all long-distance calls and continuous reports on conversations over office phones were sent up by the NOPD. So a week or so after his first polygraph, they ran a second one. He was irritated and nervous and got a very jagged chart, even though the examiner had cleared it, or so he claimed. The examiner contended that the test showed that B never had been with the CIA, but had been sent to penetrate the office. Nobody paid much attention. So, B's work and work style. B spent several weeks at the beginning working with William Martin. Also in those days, everyone was sent to Barbara Reed, who had a lot of information about the French Quarter, but was a puppet of Mumu Chiambra, whom B seems to consider the NODA, New Orleans DA, Eminence Grise. B complained, so Garrison told him to do whatever he wanted. Parenthetically, Chiambra's liberal exterior masks a fervent admiration for Congressman John Rarick. Fruge is another fan. B's first road assignment was to Dallas to check Lee Odom. This was late June or mid-July. He started averaging 20 days a month on the road and will match his hours against any two of the New Orleans people except Garrison. Boxley admits to having been incognito and secretive and doing most of his reporting to Garrison personally. He was not very happy with some members of the staff and also did not want to have to dodge reporters. He did not sign memoranda because he was leery of possible CIA retaliation and of possible publicity. As an instance of the latter, B cites the chart he made in the late 68 showing relationships between various people, with the central character being Andy Anderson. This doodle was inflated into B's version of the assassination conspiracy, and a copy was given to Paul Rothenmall by Harold Weisberg at about the time Boxley was fired. Now, for folks who may not be familiar with the name Andy Anderson, I would urge you to go back and listen to Quick Hits. Let's see, what episode was that? I don't remember. We had archaeologist Jeffrey Shanks on talking about that very thing. So very interesting. Boxley denies having scared a black investigator with stories about a pinprick lobotomy technique, although he knows of such a technique, or of having convinced the man that people were after him. Boxley met him only once when the man was waiting to see Alcock to resign. Chiambra had brought him into the office to investigate the black witnesses in Clinton, Louisiana, where he was cornered outside a boarding house away from his gun by 10 blacks who threatened him and told him to leave. Regarding the Clinton incident, Boxley says that the major white witnesses were all members of the Ku Klux Klan, and Boxley feels this seriously damages the credibility of the story. Boxley was fired the Sunday before the Monday in which the U.S. Supreme Court announced its Clay Shaw decision. The office already had advance notice through a contact at the court. This is not the first time I've heard of such helpful contacts from Pershing Gervais. There had been a conference at Matt Herron's house, the gist of which was that Boxley was Mr. Inside, Bill Turner was Mr. Outside, Steve Jaffe and Jim Rose were agents, and the office had been saved in the nick of time by Weisberg and Salandria. Boxley wonders whether Weisberg and Salandria were fronting for Garrison in this, or whether they did indeed convince Garrison that Boxley was an agent. He is highly suspicious of the motives of Weisberg and especially Salandria. Interesting. Boxley had just gotten back into town and telephoned Garrison's home. Salandria answered and began insulting Boxley regarding his Robert Perrin work. Salandria invited Boxley over to defend his work, saying, "I want a piece of your ass." He called back a second time at around 9 p.m. from the restaurant at Carlos Marcello's Town and Country Motel, where he had gone to think the situation over and await Garrison's return. Salandria again answered, and Boxley asked if Garrison had returned yet, and Salandria replied, "No, Boxley, but you are fired, and here's Lou Ivan and Moose Yambra to tell you about it." Boxley decided there was no point in continuing the conversation, so he put the phone back on the hook with the same eloquence I had seen Garrison use many times, and drove to the Holiday Inn, Orange, Texas. Boxley feels that if he had gone to Garrison's house that night, he might have been murdered. Boxley knew that the prosecution did not want to go to trial, and in mid-1968 he stepped into Garrison's office during a meeting of Garrison, Ward, Alcock, Ivan, and Chiambra. Garrison said that Boxley was trustworthy and asked him to stay. Boxley learned at that meeting that Garrison had no case against Shaw, but Boxley will not specify how he came to that conclusion. Boxley's .38 had been stolen from his car while it was at the service station used for New Orleans DA vehicles. Ivan kept assuring Boxley that it would turn up, and Boxley would say, "Yeah, it's a scene of an unsolved crime." The normally humorless Ivan would chuckle. Boxley feared that with an upcoming trial, the prosecution knew it would lose. The only way out would be to fake an incident. What better way to win the case beforehand in the press than to have Boxley, the CIA agent, in quotes, killed while attempting to murder Garrison? Wow. As an aside, Boxley feels that one of the reasons for staff hostility towards him was that he made more money than they did. Concerning Guy Bannister, he earned FBI fame and J. Edgar Hoover's undying gratitude when he filched the Nazi diplomatic code from the Mexico City embassy. Okay. Boxley once saw a memorandum from Delphine Roberts informing Bannister that she had obtained for him a post office box in the name of some organization. The memorandum contained a diagram of the box's combination dial. Boxley also saw a letter from Bannister to Guy Johnson stating that Bannister had recruited a couple of students, one of whom drove a taxi, and a Loyola library employee who would ascertain who checked out pro-communist books. Bannister undoubtedly was a government agent of some sort. There is little possibility that Bannister was CIA. It is quite probable that he was FBI, but he could have been ONI. Bannister's files contained a detailed report to files on what he suspected was the use of TACA Airlines as a government communications channel. The report gave the names of the crew of the flight in question and particulars of the operation. Bannister stated, "We may have cut across a CIA operation and should therefore proceed with extreme caution. It is extremely unlikely that a CIA agent would write such a report." In a conversation with Boxley in 1967, Paul Rothermel expressed surprise when Bannister was dead. Quote, "Maybe he was putting me on." Concerning Andy Anderson, Paul Rothermel, and Lee Odom, Boxley knew Rothermel before he had ever heard of Garrison. The first week Boxley was in Dallas for Garrison, he and Rothermel lunched at the Petroleum Club. Rothermel said that he did not know about Lee Oswald, but, quote, "I know for a fact that Ruby is an FBI informant, or was an FBI informant." Rothermel and Bannister left the FBI at about the same time. Anderson also was on Ruby's Special Carousel Club pass list, along with the head of the Dallas Minutemen and his sidekick. The niece said that Anderson's brother, who acted as a sort of aide-de-camp to Anderson, had lots of fascinating travels and had been a card-carrying communist. Boxley feels that perhaps this is just innocent, but maybe to protect a counter-espionage operation. Odom tried to get Anderson's niece, a bullfight fan, to introduce him to her uncle, who wanted Odom to contact Anderson. Both Odom and Anderson gave stories to the Dallas Times-Herald regarding how and why they met Shaw. Later, each altered their story within a day of the other. The King's Club was frequented by Rothermel, Anderson, and Ruby. Anderson's connection with the Dallas FBI was his very close friend Will Griffin. While Boxley was in Dallas, Anderson was at the Hilton from a policeman. Boxley got an alleged list of Anderson's phone calls, and the first number called was the FBI. Rothermel, of course, has DPD connections. He is close to George Butler, a sometime H.L. Hunt driver. Rothermel told Boxley that if Jack Revell quotes Hosty, Revell is accurate, indicating a close enough acquaintance with both men to feel qualified to make such a judgment. Once in Rothermel's office, Boxley met a DPD bugging expert named, he thinks, Singleton. Concerning Robert Lee Perrin, when Nancy Perrin Rich returned to New Orleans, she worked for a fire extinguisher firm called Justice Enterprises, headed by one first name unknown Justice. It was in a 3-office building with Litton Industries and more business forms. It folded in late '63, and Justice went to St. Petersburg, Florida. Boxley was told by Tommy Baumler, a near Nazi, that its lawyers were also the lawyers for the Jewish underground that got Eichmann, a possible intelligence connection. Hogwash. Eichmann was the first spotted by Simon Wiesenthal of the Jewish Documentation Center in Vienna, by a fluke, I might add, and then snagged by the Israeli government. Boxley denies saying that Nancy was the RFK slaying girl in the polka dot dress. That was Bill Turner. But Turner called back from Los Angeles 2 or 3 days later and said that the identification had fallen through. The allegation had been made that Boxley claimed that the Perrins were in New Orleans to get a conspiracy going in 1961, that they had picked the wharf, but the attitudes of the New Orleans police chief, Gio Russo, prevented their plans from bearing fruit. Boxley says the wharf as an assassination site was found by Turner, who went there with Boxley after they found the Perrins' apartment. Boxley agrees that it is an ideal assassination site, but denies saying anything other than it was a possibility the Perrins were there for such a purpose. Since he knows nothing about the attitudes of Gio Russo, he could not say whether they were the reason the Perrins were not able to participate in an assassination conspiracy in New Orleans in 1961. It was Garrison, not Boxley, who loudly proclaimed that Perrin was on the knoll. Boxley did say, however, that he has 4 reliable witnesses to say that Perrin worked at the downtown Lincoln Mercury under another name after the assassination. Garrison was more enthusiastic than Boxley about Perrin as the solution to the assassination. What Boxley said was to postulate a good cover being to kill off one's agent legally before the operation. Several people knew Robert and Nancy Perrin as Jack and Nancy Starr. For a while, federal agents were asking people if they knew of a friend of Jack Starr's named Gimpy in some East Texas county, which is the center of the righteous militancy. Headed by a lawyer named Judge Baker, a corpse was found on June 14th, 1964, minus a head, hands, and legs from the knees down. It has been on ice since then, and several hundred people have been unable to identify it. The head had been severed quite far down, almost to the collarbone, obviously not done by the average nut with an axe. While removing head and hands is a standard way to keep a corpse from being identified, Boxley felt the only reason for removing the legs would be the same. Removing only one leg, the bad one, would be a giveaway, so removing both legs makes more sense. He feels it is a distinct possibility that the corpse is indeed Gimpy. Hey there, Gimpy boy. Karen's brother says he was a hell of a good shot, that they went hunting together, and Boxley feels the whole matter is a tremendous mystery and needs more investigation. Boxley is suspicious that Nancy testified at all, for there was no need. 2 weeks after she testified, the FBI sent a letter to the NOPD asking for all their raw material on Robert Perrin's death. It was sent, but the FBI never returned it. The night that Robert Perrin died, Nancy had the car in Baton Rouge. Perrin got a ride home with a black coworker named Bars. As usual, they stopped at Walgreens drugstore where Perrin came out carrying a small paper sack. Perrin told Bars to let him off at the corner rather than in front of his apartment, as was the usual arrangement. He told Bars to pick him up at 7 a.m. on the corner, but oddly not to wait if he wasn't there. Drugstore records and witnesses do not reflect the purchase by Perrin of anything containing arsenic or ethyl ether. The downstairs maid, whom B considers reliable, says she never saw an empty ether can in the trash and that she would have known if ether was around because her employer was allergic to it. The autopsy papers contain no mention of the esophagus, which would have been inflamed by the ingestion of ether. There is no record of the esophagus ever being examined. A later dated addition to the autopsy report cited ingestion of ether as the cause of death, leaving some question as to the 4 ounces of arsenic inside Robert Perrin. Joel Palmer was working with Barbara Reed on Perrin, and she said she saw and was trying to obtain a coroner's report describing scratches in Robert Perrin's esophagus, which would be consistent with B's theory that Perrin was hit on the head. 2 doctors who read the autopsy report said that it describes a blow to the head shortly before death, kept under with ether, and had arsenic forced down his throat. Nancy testified that both she and Perrin had published under the name of Starr. It was stronger than that, however. Quite a few people knew them in employment and socially as Jack and Nancy Starr. Also, the corpse in New Orleans does not seem, from the autopsy description, to have a certain known Perrin characteristics, such as an amputated right index fingertip. Federal agents managed to confiscate the fingerprints of Perrins all over the country, but they did not get them all. Checks letters show that more than one person was signing things as Nancy Perrin. Interesting. Now, we talked about our boy Jim Rose a little earlier, and Boxley says he's suspicious that perhaps Rose was an agent while working for Garrison. Rose never told Boxley that he had been a CIA agent, just that he performed some services for them. Boxley once picked up 10 $100 bills in an office to deliver to Rose for his trip to Seattle to investigate Fred Lee Chrisman. Rose bought a car for the trip. Boxley cites Rose's possession of the first secretary's card as reason for suspicion of his status. Also, once Rose was staying at the Ramada Inn. He had picked up a couple of Boxley's habits, like wearing a pin and smoking Benson and Hedges. Boxley entered the inn to call Rose on the house phone. There was a payphone next to it, in front of which was an empty Benson and Hedges box with a phone number written in it. B picked it up. He called Rose, who came down, and they talked. Boxley showed him the box and razzed him about being a better operative and to leave an identifiable telephone number laying around. Rose admitted it was his handwriting, but did not seem excited and left the box laying on the table where Boxley put it. The number was that of Delta Air Freight. Boxley checked, and Rose had no air freight coming or going. The use of airlines as clandestine government communications channels. Now, let's look at the Mafia contract on Garrison. Boxley feels this was legitimate, that the Mafia was out to kill Garrison. When the office heard the allegation, Lynn Loisel said he had better contact Regis Kennedy, then stopped dialing and said Ivan would want to do it. Ivan agreed. Boxley seems to consider this significant for reasons unknown to me. So Loisel called the state police instead. At the time, Garrison was in Albuquerque and was going to head from there to Los Angeles. Boxley had Albuquerque Deputy Sheriff's credentials, number 313. He did not recognize the irony until I mentioned it. Yeah, Zapruder frame 313. Deputy John Gonzalez said he would assign immediately 5 men to guard Garrison. Boxley flew to Albuquerque in part to act as bodyguard for Garrison, mostly because nobody else wanted to. Garrison had spoken the night before and insisted on getting to Los Angeles that night because he had a date. An ice storm had grounded the airlines, and Garrison wanted to rent a private plane. They finally managed to fly on Western or Frontier to Denver, then by United to Los Angeles. Garrison ended up that night at Stefanino's on the Sunset Strip. Garrison had told Boxley to contact the LAPD regarding the Mafia contract. Two members of the Vice Squad entered Stefanino's. One said to Boxley, "You stupid son of a bitch, are you supposed to be his bodyguard?" Boxley said he was, and was told that Stefanino's was the biggest Mafia joint in town. The cops bellied up to the bar, and within seconds the cocktail lounge almost emptied. Garrison was in the dining room, and one of the LAPD officers said that one of those he had chased off was a shotgun artist sitting at a table right across from your boss. Boxley feels the Mafia contract was canceled by people of great influence because killing Garrison would make a martyr out of him, but a court defeat would discredit him. Edgar Eugene Bradley and the Los Angeles trip. Garrison stayed at the International Hotel at the airport. He registered there as Clyde Ballou, and the desk clerk grinned. Garrison was not converted to charging Bradley once he was in Los Angeles. He went there intending to get Bradley for something. The day after the Stefanino's incident, Turner came down with some Bradley photos and an advance copy of the January '68 Ramparts magazine. Boxley and Turner went to see ate a lot in Thornhill. When shown a photo of the walking men, tramps, Adiolite's comment was, "Gene always did wear his shoes run down at the heels." The day after, B and Turner went to see Dennis Maurer in Lancaster. They had to go through intermediaries and be checked out before they met him. The third day, Garrison ordered that Bradley be charged. Garrison was hunting for Bradley for a special reason. Boxley is playing hide the ball with the reason, and will only say that he is not proud of the reason, but that it was not any personal vendetta. Garrison sent Jaffe to New Orleans with instructions to charge Bradley. The staff refused. In any event, Jaffe was considered a lightweight. Boxley, when informed, went to a payphone and called the office. Al Cox said they were in the middle of a staff meeting and that nobody would sign the complaint. Garrison had a tantrum and said he would fire them all. Boxley talked him into phoning. Garrison spent 30 minutes on the phone and the complaint was signed. Boxley had not heard that Jack Lawrence, Lauren Hall, Lawrence Howard, and William Seymour were to be charged as well. If this was the case, nobody had told him. It was not Boxley and Turner, but Dick Billings and Life who had Garrison running after Hall, Howard, and Seymour. They lost interest in Garrison as he lost interest in their favorite suspects. As to Jack Lawrence, Garrison later was searching for a reason to charge him with anything that he could. Boxley never said that Bradley was a killer or even that he was in the CIA. Some witnesses claimed Bradley was in covert FBI activities under a naval cover. Then there was Bradley's important role in the J. Edgar Hoover for President activities. Boxley felt that, if anything, Bradley was FBI. The allegation had been made that Boxley claimed that Eric Starvo Galt met Bradley and that the Van Nuys Wallace for president's office was just a front. Boxley denies this and never even heard of the allegation before. In Los Angeles, everybody was jumpy over the Mafia allegation. Boxley says that Sacramento and the LAPD, as well as the telephone tip, said there was such a contract. Garrison and Boxley had met Larry Schiller earlier that evening. Also, Boxley was with Garrison when he insulted a Los Angeles Times reporter named Dreyfus because he did not like that paper. So Boxley was in his room trying to paper the insult over, and Garrison was in his own room, not Boxley's. A bellhop knocked and handed B a manila envelope unmarked with something hard inside. It was a copy of Schiller's book, but Boxley was jumpy, so he placed it in the bathtub, but without running water, and closed the door. Later, he opened it and learned what it was. Thankfully, not a bomb. Regarding Richard Case Nagel, Boxley and Jones Harris were to have met Nagel in New York. 30 to 60 minutes before the meeting, Nagel's sister phoned him. Nagel had called her from the airport and said he had 2 friends with him. She said to bring them along, and he said they weren't that good of friends, so Nagel was being tailed. Regarding Private Eugene Dinkin, Boxley says it was a very interesting story, including how Dinkin turned up in New York. Boxley's basic reaction is that Dinkin's paranoia deserves a second look. For one thing, they do not take people like Dinkin into crypto work, the importance of which is second only to nuclear topics. He was in Europe handling coded Algerian traffic when he came rushing into the next room saying the president was going to be killed in Dallas. Boxley also thinks he named the date. He was taken to a military hospital under heavy guard after he told his captain about this intercept. Then, unprecedentedly, he was taken later to Walter Reed Hospital. Boxley says the lead came from a Dinkin acquaintance at Fort Hood. Boxley talked to a Chilean boy who provided him with the present whereabouts of members of Dinkin's unit. Basically, they were the military police. Dinkin took a polygraph in Chicago and has the results with him. Boxley feels that he has gotten sued and is now just parroting a false story. Miscellaneous. It was Garrison, not Boxley, who said the CIA had agents running double or triple duty. Boxley never believed this since compartmentalization is elementary security. Also, Boxley never said that the assassination team is still operating. He is sure that they and their output died within hours of the assassination. Loyalty, after all, never can be predicted. One day, Garrison was reading the Texas AG's report and came dashing into the office. He had discovered that when Breck Wall first moved to Dallas, he had a little bar. Once he applied for something or other and gave 2 personal references, one of which was Earl Cabell. Wall was in Houston the same time as Ferry and got a phone call in Galveston from Ruby a few hours before Oswald was shot. B designed and got Penn Jones to print a leaflet which Boxley showed Rothermel and urged him to use. It was to be wrapped around copies of the Hepburn book and said something about how the book was being distributed by H.L. Hunt in the interest of free speech. The reader may imagine the reception it got. After Boxley left Garrison's employ, he learned that the CIA has a Garrison desk. After he was fired, about 3 weeks after, he got a call from a private investigator that he did not know. He believes the man's name was Walter Holloway. Holloway offered him a job, but Boxley refused because the employer was to be Ed Wegman. That is Clay Shaw's lawyer. Boxley's present feeling is that the assassination was engineered by the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I do not eliminate the possibility that the Joint Chiefs were fronting for or in collusion with the CIA. The background, Boxley says, read Kennedy's Private War in the 22nd of July 71 New York Review of Books. Since weaving the plot structure took a lot of work, Boxley wonders what Allen Dulles was doing after his retirement. Boxley feels that the investigation was controlled enough that the volumes and archives are of minimal relevance. Dallas is crammed with emigres who would be an FBI concern and with firms which send people all over the world. This makes it of interest as to espionage and counter-espionage activities. Boxley also feels that the confusion arising from the multiplicity of such people and operations was the reason that Dallas was chosen as the assassination site. So, there you have it, folks. That is the musings of Bill Boxley, also known as William Wood, former CIA agent and employee into the District Attorney's Office investigation of Clay Shaw into the murder of John F. Kennedy. So was he legit or not? Was he above board or not? We can only speculate at this point. Anyway, that's it for your boy, the This has been episode number 238. Follow along on TikTok and Twitter at the Lone Gunman 7, on Facebook, the Lone Gunman Facebook page, and on YouTube, the Lone Gunman Podcast channel. Thank you. We've reached 1,000 subscribers, baby. Woohoo! Keep sharing and liking. And go get yourself some goddamn hot sauce. Please. Peace. And enjoy the sweet dulcet tones of Shepherd of Fire and their hit single, Conspiracy.
Don't